Welcome to another Sunday morning edition of Adult Bible Class. This is John McMath. We're here at South Hill Bible Church for those of you out in iPhone land. Good to have everybody with us this morning. We've been working our way through background to the books of Joshua and Judges. And I don't know how far we're going to get. It sounds like I'm not going to get a whole lot farther. I had expected to go a whole lot faster, but then I discovered that I was sending myself down my own rabbit holes, and it's been, that's okay. That's okay. Today we're all the way up to the 5th chapter of Joshua. I'll be lucky to get through chapter 6. It's fun. It's fun. Let's pray, and we're going to jump into the end of chapter 5 here in Joshua. Father, thank you for the privilege we have of studying together. We thank you for our fellowship. We thank you for the peace that we have with you. Thank you, Father, for teaching us in your word. We pray that as we go deeper into the scriptures, you would show us your truth more clearly. We pray in Christ's name, amen. So we get the story at the beginning of verse 13 that came about. That's a great phrase, by the way. The Hebrew is just one word. And it happened, or and it came to pass. We translate in English, but there really is no good translation for this. We find it a bunch of times. And then it happened that Joshua was by Jericho. So within sight of Jericho, but probably out of arrow shot. He was there just taking a good look at things. Joshua was most likely trained as an Egyptian commander. He very likely went through some of the same training that Moses would have gone through. And in the wilderness, Joshua had the opportunity to practice his skills. So Joshua wasn't merely a spiritual leader. He was actually a general. Some of you, I hope, have been keeping track of what's happening in the Middle East right now. This is a really, really good thing. If Iran can be put off of its nuclear pretensions, that will give the whole Middle East perhaps a generation before war comes again. And that would be a very good thing. The Muslim world will not be happy about this, but you're going to find there are Muslims and there are Muslims. And this is going to be a fascinating thing to watch play out. I'm very interested to see how it works. Donald Trump played this extraordinarily well. And the Israelis did some things that we will probably hear about slowly over the next year or two. And this is very good. I pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I pray that Israel will have stability and prosperity. But I also pray that the Arab and Persian and Turkish and Egyptian adversaries in the neighborhood will learn something from this. Sometimes there's only a hard way. The Canaanites in Jericho needed to learn some hard truths the hard way. Joshua was there to do that. So Joshua is down getting close to the city of Jericho. Would have been a short walk from the campsite. They were camping at Gilgal, which is about a mile, something like that, north of the old tell of Jericho. Jericho, by the way, is one of the easiest cities to identify in the ancient world. There are some others that are also easy, but Jericho is right up there toward the top. It's got to be on the north-south Jordan River Road. It's got to be on the intersection with the road to Jerusalem. It's got to be next to a major water source because it's an oasis. And it's got to be a tell that goes back to the very origins of Old Testament time or earlier. It has to be all of those things. And when you go through the Jordan Valley, you discover that there isn't any other place, anything like this place, anywhere near this place, so this has got to be the place. It just sticks out there, and it's just very, very, very obvious. And it was also obvious that Joshua had to take Jericho. He couldn't leave an enemy, no matter how small, in his rear. He knew that he was heading into the central hill country. The Wadi Kelt is the main tributary into the Jordan at that point. And that was the way that Joshua intended to go up into the central hill country. Jericho was just obvious. And the people of Jericho knew that they were the obvious target. I mean, here's this big army across the river. They know they're coming. They saw them cross the river. You couldn't miss it. They saw where they camped. Again, none of this was done in secret. And so they prepared for a siege, because that's how these things happen. It's significant that the army and the king of Jericho didn't come dashing out with their cavalry and their swords and their armor and their chariots and whatnot to oppose the army of Israel. It's called a sortie in French, but they didn't do that, which tells me something very, very important. With a fortress at your back and a nice big army standing behind the walls with arrows and such, it would be fairly comfortable for a group of elite troops, if you had them, to sortie out and try to, take out some leadership in the opposing army. But the army of Jericho didn't do that because there was probably no army of Jericho. We'll talk about that a little more in a second here. But, so Joshua's outside there. He's scoping things out. He's heard the report of the spies, and he wants to see for himself. That's what you do. And looking around, he saw that the city of Jericho was shut firmly. That means that the gates were closed, of course. The gates were barred. The gates were blocked. The wall of Jericho, which was well inside the suburbs of Jericho, was manned. The suburbs had probably been leveled, which again is what you do. You present scorched earth, no place to hide as you're coming in. And Joshua was out there looking around to see what there was to see, when who should he notice but behold. And again, this is one of those words that doesn't translate very well. The Hebrew is hine, and it literally means, oh look, or something like that. And it doesn't work very well in an English translation. And so I like to use behold, because it sounds a little silly. He looked, he lifted up his eyes, and he looked, and behold, that's all it is. But that is a very, very common sequence in Hebrew, and it's very common. And he saw a man standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. Okay, now this character is not the angel of the Lord. I think that's probably Julius Caesar. I shot that in Naples, so it's some Roman emperor or another. But he looked something like that, only with a sword in his hand. And so you wander, you're outside the enemy capital, and you meet somebody you don't recognize, who is obviously armed. And Joshua did what he'd been trained to do when he was a little nipper, back when he was a corporal. He'd been told, when you're in this kind of a situation and you see somebody you don't recognize who's carrying arms, you challenge them. Today it goes, halt, who goes there? Identify yourself, whether you be friend or foe. And that's exactly what Joshua did. He says, are you for us or for our adversaries? And that seems like a fairly simple question, because in that spot, there aren't any neutrals. If you're part of the army of Jericho, well, then you're definitely not an Israelite, and so you could answer the question, I am your foeman, sir, prepare your steel. You know, you could, whatever. But the response would have been hostile. Instead, this character, armed, facing Joshua, says, no. No, what kind of a question is that? And I've always liked that. He said, no. Rather, I indeed have come now as the host, as the captain of the host of the Lord. Okay, the term host is old Hebrew word. We run into it in one of our songs. Which one is it? Is it Mighty Fortress is Our God? Has the phrase, Lord Sebaot is his name. And everybody wants it to be Sabaoth because they think it should be Lord of the Sabbath, but it's not. It's Sebaot, and it means Lord of hosts. And it's the interesting use of the word. Sometimes it means the host of heaven in the sense of all the stars. He's the one who leads the stars and does all of that. Sometimes it means the host of heaven in the sense of the angels who are going to come, 10,000 angels, the host of the Lord, that kind of thing. Sometimes Sebaot means the armies of Israel, literally. And so this captain is coming as the Lord of hosts, of the host of Israel, and he's going to lead this army. In the words of a famous preacher, some of you know of Tony Evans. Does anybody know who Tony Evans is? I love the guy. He and I took Arabic together. He did well. I passed the course. Tony Evans is a really smart dude. On this, I heard him in our Promise Keepers years ago, that when Joshua confronted the angel of the Lord replied, no, because I didn't come to take sides. I came to take over. And it's fairly clear from this point on that this battle is going to be entirely God's battle. And God is doing this as a demonstration. If you walk with me, if you listen to my words, every place where you put your foot, you will possess, because I am with you. And so there's this a fundamental promise going on here, and the relationship is going to be that way. Are you for us or our adversaries? No. I've come as the captain of the host, and Joshua fell. Oh, let's talk about swords and armor for a bit. Okay, I've got some other stuff to talk about. two basic kinds of swords were being used at the time that Joshua was written. This is toward the end of the late Bronze Age. Earlier, things were a little different. But there's two kinds of swords up here. The one on the upper left is called a sickle sword. And we think of a sickle and it's sharpened on the inside, and you cut grass with it or something like that. The sickle sword was made of bronze. That inner edge was thickened to give it some pizzazz so that it wouldn't break. And it's the outer edge that is sharp. And when the typical sickle sword is about that long, it weighs maybe 15 pounds. They're not lightweight tools. When you use this thing, it's a hacking tool. It's not you're not going to be doing this kind of sword fighting with it. It's a over the top and come down on whatever you can hit. The phrase in the Old Testament, to smite with the edge of the sword, refers to these old sickle swords. It's a weapon very similar to a battle axe. Same principle. You're taking a heavy, sharp object and hitting people with it at arm's length. So as you can probably imagine, and it doesn't take a lot of imagination, actual infantry combat in the ancient world was a close-up, personal, terribly bloody, awful thing. Nobody ever looks forward to that except people who've never been there. One of the ways that you can tell a veteran, a combat veteran, from somebody who isn't yet, somebody who's never seen the elephant, is that a combat veteran really never wants to go back. He will if he has to, but he'd really rather not. The neophyte, the beginner, the uninitiated, can hardly wait for the glory and the adventure. And 10 minutes into that, and they're ready to come home. So this is a picture. That's one. The other is a short sword. They're usually about this, not longer than a cubit. It's more of a dagger than a sword, really. Short bronze swords were fragile, so they weren't meant for sword fighting. Again, you don't get into whack, 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 and all of this kind. You use the capybara, I see. I've always been fond of that myself, but perhaps you know, there's none of that going on. A real sword fight is over in seconds. You either get hit in the head with something sharp, or you get stabbed with something sharp, and you're out of the fight. It isn't pretty. So the swords, we've got all kinds of these, and we can find them in the digs often. So Joshua fell face down. Interesting. Come as the captain of the host of the Lord, Joshua fell on his face to the earth, and he bowed down and said, "What has my Lord to say to his servant?" Now, what I want you to catch is another very important Hebrew word. There are several words in Hebrew that every Christian really ought to know. Amen, shalom. You really should know those. Kadosh is holy. And hishtahava is another one everybody should know. Hishtahava is the Old Testament word for worship. It's an interesting word. For the longest time, scholars thought it was some kind of a hiphil formative from a verb they've never heard of anywhere else in the whole Semitic vocabulary of shahav. Sheen, hey, bravo. But it's not. It's built on the root hava. Hey Beit Hey. And it's got a Hishta preformative, which is interesting and strange, and I'm not going to teach you quite enough Hebrew to understand, but it's an intensive. It makes the word stronger, and it's a reflexive. Hebrew has three ways of saying something. It can be the normal, active, the stem root, which is he did something, they did something, he hit him. Okay. Now, passive is the alternative. Somebody hit him. He was hit by somebody, he was conquered by somebody, so on. That's the passive. If you do something to yourself, that's a reflexive. So in Hebrew we use there's an old-fashioned word that turns out to be the only regular verb in the Hebrew language, which is katal, QTL. And katal means to kill, which is not a pleasant word to use all the time, but that's the one that we use to build our diagrams. If you're teaching students the 9 different ways of saying something in Hebrew, you've got to have something, and it helps if it's regular, and this is the only one that is, which makes you ask yourself, if nothing in Hebrew is regular, why do they call it regular when, well, anyway. If you're wondering, just compare it to French. Je ne parle français, mademoiselle, ne parlez-vous anglais? Okay, so the hishta there on the front is intensive and reflexive. And so there's a great deal of enthusiasm going on in the word. And there's also an intentional self-inflicting element to it. Hava, all by itself, means to bow down. And this word where Joshua bows down before the Lord is hishtahava. All right? And it literally means to get down on your face in front of the one that you are serving. Literally, that's what it means. And I don't know why ancient kings liked that, but apparently they did. And that's what people did in this time. Joshua falls before him, demonstrating his service. That word is normally translated in the rest of the Old Testament, worship. This is hishtahava. Okay? The young men with Daniel were told to bow down in front of Nebuchadnezzar's statue and worship. And they couldn't do that. Because worship is not just an act that you go through and then it's over. Worship is the voluntary, enthusiastic submission of yourself to a God who is worthy of infinitely more. What can I give God? He already owns everything. What can I do to demonstrate that I love him? What does he want from me? He wants me.
Would you repeat that definition, please?
Say again.
Would you repeat that definition, please?
Would I repeat the definition, please? I suspect she's doing that for you.
No.
I suspect that my wife over here, teacher as she is, wants to make sure that all of the 5-year-olds in the room. Okay. Worship is the voluntary, enthusiastic submission of all that I am to a God who is worthy of infinitely more. What can I give him? I give him myself. Now, that's the only gift God really needs. once I've given him myself, everything else that's a part of me goes with that. So Joshua bows down. This Hishtahava, he bowed himself down. I can't force anybody to worship. And he was enthusiastic in this thing. What does the Lord require of me? It puts a little different flavor on the concept of worship when we recognize how practical it really is. Everybody likes singing and prayer and all the rest of it. I love going to church. It's a pain in the neck when we can't get to church. I like the respite from the rest of the week. And the idea of coming to church as a gift of myself to God, my time, my energy, my resources, this belongs to God. And it's a reminder to me that I've made this commitment, and I continue to make this commitment. And here is church, and here I am. Here I'm in church, and I'm submitting myself to God enthusiastically and on my own. That's the essence of it. The music is not the worship. The music is a part of the surroundings, the context in which worship happens. On our best days, Sunday morning church is a call to worship and not worship itself. Worship itself happens all the time. Anyway, that's rabbit trail number 406 printed copies are available. Okay. And so the captain of the Lord's host said, remove your sandals. Ooh, let's look at sandals. Joshua is probably wearing sandals. Most people, most of the time, wore sandals as a simple piece of leather on the bottom. Sometimes they would use wood if that was available and they could make it comfortable. It was harder to do. Leather had a way of shaping to your feet. And this is very common. We find leather sandals in archaeological sites. We don't ever find boots. The Romans later would put a whole new definition on military sandals. Roman sandals were a weapon to behold. They could dig in with a thing like that and push against a pike, and the Romans were really something. But this is a long time before the Romans. They were in sandals. And many times in Scripture, Moses on Mount Sinai, for example, we see examples of the prophets and of the people of God coming before the Lord and in the presence of God, removing their sandals. It's a tradition. I'm not sure why that was the way it was, but we see this all through the Old Testament. Take your sandals off. You're on holy ground. Okay? So this ground is set aside for a special purpose right now, and that purpose is for you to bow down before the Lord. Okay, so remove your sandals. Now Jericho was tightly shut up. Okay, tightly shut up. And it's interesting. Jericho itself, yes?
Just a question before you move on.
That's fine.
I've been reading through Exodus.
Yeah.
And
Good book to read.
When God first shows up,
Yeah.
He gives the commandments.
Yeah.
There's this place in chapter 23. I just want to read 3 verses and see if you think this is what he's talking about here, what we just
Okay.
read. He says, behold, this is Exodus 23:20. Behold, I am going to send an angel before you to guard you along the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Be on your guard before him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious toward him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, since my name is in him. But if you truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the I will completely destroy them.
Mhm. Yes, I think that's the same character.
Okay, so I'm thinking that Joshua is sort of having this
Mhm.
affirmation that this is his,
Yes.
like
Yes.
God's favor is on. Am I stealing your thunder?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you're not stealing my thunder. I would not have referred to Exodus 23, but you're right. You're absolutely right. That's the prediction. And it's the same character.
Okay.
Yeah, no question about that. Yeah, you're absolutely, good eyes, by the way. Not everybody sees them. So the angel of the Lord went through them all along the way. He wasn't always visible. He wasn't always up front with a sword in his hand and a red cape and all the rest. But he was always there. And the point of that promise and then of the reaffirmation here is that if you will worship me, I will always be with you. When you go through the really hard places, like breaching the walls of Jericho, I will be with you. And anything else you can think of. For God has purposed good for all of those who love him and are the called according to his purpose. God intends to do good things for us. All he requires in return is worship, which isn't sing a song on Sunday. It's submit all of me, all the time, enthusiastically to a God who is worthy. It comes down to that. So Joshua is in the right place here, and he knows he's in the right place. As soon as this character, we call him the angel of the Lord, as soon as this character makes himself known, Joshua puts himself in the proper position. And he says, I am fully submitted to God. And interestingly, this angelic character accepts worship. If this were merely one of the crowd of angels, we would not get this kind of response. This is a character who operates with the full authority of God and is willing to accept worship. Most modern evangelical scholars are hesitant to call this character the pre-incarnate Christ. That's a term that goes back for the angel of the Lord all the way to patristic times. And I'm hesitant to use that phrase because it makes the incarnation a smaller thing. I believe the incarnation is genuinely unique, and that Christ didn't just pop into the world and walk around as a man routinely whenever he felt the urge. I think the incarnation needs to be held as a unique event. On the other hand, whoever this is one very important and powerful honcho. And so it is tempting to say this has to be Christ. I get the tension, but I got to do. Man's got to do what a man's got to do. Some things work better than others. So Jericho was tightly shut up. This means the walls were all closed. In the casemate between the outer and the inner walls, all the way around 28 acres of Jericho, rubble was thrown. Houses that had been built outside the walls because of the Pax Egyptica were torn down, and blocks and bricks and mud stuff and furniture and whatever else was tossed into the wall. And that strengthens the wall, makes it less likely to fall down. They maybe weren't counting on quite the earthquake that Joshua was planning, but that's the way that worked. The gate itself would have been very tightly shut. I mentioned about sockets a couple of weeks ago. This is in a museum in Israel. I've forgotten which museum, it doesn't matter. That's a gate post thing. That's the post that goes into the tenon. There's going to be a socket in the stone at the base and another socket in the stone at the top. And this bronze or iron fixture goes down into that so that it pivots, and it would squeak like amazing. You know, this is hardly nicely engineered, but it was effective. And so a big, thick, metal reinforced gate would be in place, you know, portcullis and all the dragons put in the moat. Everything is done to get it ready. Now, by the way, the moat at Jericho would have been what we call a fosse. That's a dry moat. And if we were to, let's see if I can draw a description. I don't have a whiteboard here, so you're going to have to visualize it. Here's the city. Okay, and then buildings. And come to the edge, and here's the wall. And it goes over the top of the wall. Along the top of that wall, there's a place for soldiers to walk with bows and arrows, and there's the occasional big tower, but here's this, and you've got an outie and an innie, or an innie and an outie, and at the outer, it comes down to a spot about halfway down the wall, where it turns into a ramp. Now, sometimes that's faced with stone, sometimes that's just gravel built up. We call that the casemate. Okay, and so you've got this ramp along the outside. And the purpose of that is kind of interesting. There's some high tech involved with that casemate. Because it's not just rubble piled up outside the wall. If it was, it'd be easy enough to climb it. But it's rocks and stones and mud and whatever piled up with a layer of French drain, you know, river rock, about that thick, on a bit of a slope, going all the way up to the city wall. And in several places, all the way along this casemate. And then in the face of the casemate, which would have been plastered usually, small holes were left at exactly the places where that French drain would take any rainwater, any overflow, whatever drains out the outside of the city, would go onto that wall, and from 1,000 different weep holes would weep down over the surface, and the moss would grow, and the little slimy bugs would make their homes, and stuff would get muddy, and stuff would get slippery, and stuff would get slimy. And if you're a soldier trying to climb this slick plastered wall, it's going to be a real pain in the neck. Okay, that's what that is. That's the casemate. It also serves to keep the bad guys from coming up to the base of the wall so that they can undermine it. So the casemate is a very important part of the fortification. We always find it. We always find it. And when we find a city that's been breached, the siege ramp is usually built up over the top of that casemate so that the bad guys can actually climb up on something solid. At the bottom of the glacis, this outer rim, it doesn't just end in flat land. It ends in a trench. The trench is probably 6 or 8 feet wide, hand dug, another 6 feet deep. It's 8 feet wide, 6 feet deep. Soft as a downy chick, you've heard that one. And it's not. And then you put the moat dragons and the sharks and alligators in if you had them, but they didn't. It was just there. Maybe they put sharp sticks in the bottom, but that was designed to be a problem. At the outer side of that moat would be a little wall. Not a big enough wall that you have to stick up ladders and climb over, but just a big enough wall that a soldier coming toward the wall is going to have to put a hand down, get up on top of that thing, clamber up on top, put himself in full view of the archers on the wall before jumping down onto a whole bunch of sharpened stakes. Okay? And thinking about how he's going to survive the next 30 seconds or so, and then he's going to get shot. That's it. And a defense like that takes some doing. So normally, an army that was going to take a city and knew they were going to take that city would time their approach in the fairly early spring, just before harvest. And that way, the hostile army gets to have all the food in the fields, all that grain becomes food for the besieging army, and the people in the city will be starving. And that way the whole thing is over with more quickly. If you were stupid enough to lay siege to a city just after grain harvest, and the people on the inside knew that there was a siege coming, they would take all of their stuff and they'd put it in jars and they'd stow it away so that they could last for a year or more of siege. What we find in City 4, the last city at Jericho prior to the invasion of Joshua, is a whole bunch of jars that look something like this, Canaanite storage jars. That particular jar came from the Dead Sea Scrolls, so it isn't exactly the same, but jars like that. Clay jars, this big around, this high, full of grain, various kinds of grain. We find hundreds of these in City 4. We know that Joshua's invasion came in the springtime at about Passover. Passover is the celebration of the first fruits, the coming of the first harvest. Joshua waited until after the harvest before making this invasion. That's a nice move. Because that way, it's all on God. Now it's going to be this terrible siege. So it was, okay. So, Jericho, the Lord said to Joshua, "Behold, I've given Jericho into your hand, along with its king, and the valiant warriors." The term is Gibor, mighty men of valor. We see a Greek word in several places. David once is called a Chayil Gibor, a mighty man of valor. A mighty man is a man of some substance. He could afford his own armor, and he's because of his position in the community, he's a part of the defense of the community. The king and the mighty man. Well, two things we know. Well, several things we know about these guys. One, they didn't come out to meet Joshua. We've talked a little bit about the numbers, and I've told you that we have a bit of a critical problem at scholarly level. Scholars continue to debate this, and that one's not going to end for a long time. But the big numbers in the Old Testament are a consistent problem for us. In some places they make sense, which is the very best argument that they should be taken at face value everywhere. But in many other places, they don't make anywhere close to sense. 185,000 Assyrian soldiers died in one place. That would be the size of the D-Day invasions. That's huge. And everybody who's ever studied the history of war knows that the biggest problem in any battle, in any war, is not armaments, it's logistics. How do you get these guys where they need to be with enough bullets and enough beans to do what they've got to do? The food's got to be there, the weapons and equipment have got to be there, the support people have got to be there with their donkeys or camels or whatever. Somehow you've got to make that happen. That's the problem. That's a fundamental problem. And somewhere you've got to have the industrial base to make all of this work. And if you don't have that, then all the trucks in the world aren't going to help you. And the thing gets complicated, and it happens at a society-wide basis, a civilization-wide basis. If you're, anyway, I can get well far into that. But the problems with Old Testament numbers happen here too. Jericho is a tiny little spot. It's a little more than a dimple on the, or a pimple on the Jordan Valley. There's not much there. It would take an army, but not a huge army. A few thousand men could circle this city without any trouble at all. Several thousand more, and you could have multiple rings of men circling the army with their weapons and with their shofars and wandering around, thomp, 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 marching around the city for 7 days and occasionally looking up at the walls and smiling grimly. You visualize that? That's what we've got going on here. An army of several thousand should not have been a problem or faced a problem taking Jericho. And Jericho could not have fielded a large army. Part of that was deliberate. The Egyptians deliberately made sure that all of the lesser powers, the little city-states that made up Canaan, all were weak. O king, live forever. We've got a problem with Abiru around here. This year we could really use a couple of wheels for our chariot and half a dozen more arrows. Okay, to reinforce the army. The Amarna letters are full of that kind of stuff. Seriously, that would help? If you're facing an army of 5 million, that would help? No, I don't think so. So anyway, we've got very, very weak Canaanite cities, and by the same token, a relatively small Israelite population. I just have trouble with millions of them. They're probably not there. At any rate, the king and all its people, wait a minute, okay, we've got a whole bunch of detail there. And so there shall be 7 priests carrying 7 trumpets made of ram's horns before the ark. Okay. So you're going to go out there and you're going to march around the city, all your men of war circling the city once. Do this for 6 days. Every day, first thing in the morning. Finish your coffee, get yourselves all lined up, and circle the city. Don't say a word. But Private Yitzchak in the 3rd rank is going to be smirking. I know that. And some sergeant is going to say, "You quit that! I want silence here in this rank." You visualize it, they're walking around. And it's obvious what's coming. Something is coming. And the Canaanites don't know what. And then the priests are going to be carrying ram's horns. Now here's a Jewish guy with a shofar. A shofar is a ram's horn. You hollow this thing out, and on the pointy end, you blow for all you're worth. And a big one like this makes a nice, low, throaty sound if you've got enough breath. I can't make it do that. My little one, I have trouble. you know, I get a little toot out of. But if all of the priests have got something like this, that makes a racket. And it's kind of fun. It's a call to battle. And it shall come about that when they make a long blast with the ram's horns, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down. And the people will go up, every man straight ahead. Now this is exactly what you don't expect. That's not the way anybody fights this kind of a battle. You know, a siege, you sit on the outside, you eat their grain, you watch them get more and more unhappy, and eventually they surrender, everybody's happy. Well, not quite. So they're going to go on in and do it, and I'm going to quickly walk through some of this. This is the view from the top of Jericho. That freeway wasn't there, probably most of those palm trees were not there. Jericho is also called the City of Palms. There was plenty of water here. Palm trees require warm weather and lots of water. If you have to ask how much it costs to water your palm trees, you probably can't afford them. I don't know if any of you have noticed a family, I suspect, moved up from California out on Bigelow Gulch on the way into Spokane. And they built this mansion up on overlooking who knows what, with palm trees along their driveway. If you have to ask what it costs to keep palm trees happy in northeastern Washington in the wintertime, you can't afford it. Why you would want to anyway. So you've got palm trees, and this is the City of Palms, because there's quite a bit of water here. You see springs of water, pools of water in a variety of different places. In the modern world, it's easier to get the water that was there, but in the ancient world, this was a consistent source of water. There was plenty of water inside the city. There were sources that they kept. So we're going to see the destruction of Jericho. The instructions don't very much advance and march around the city. That's why they did this. Said, no. Jericho is one of the oldest places on the planet that's continually inhabited. There was good water. It was a sunny climate. Lots of stuff will grow in the surrounding area. It's on a good trade route. It makes sense that there would be something there. And there always has been. That tower doesn't look like a tower. It looks like maybe a silo deep underground. That's a corner tower of the Chalcolithic age city of Jericho. That means that's a really, really, really old tower. Kathleen Kenyon puts it at 7,000 years old. I disagree with Kenyon on just about everything, that included, but it's still old. That's built on, when you get all the way down to the bottom of that tower, you'll find the Chalcolithic age. You'll find a pottery and no flint knives, no metal of any form, no bronze. So this is really old. It was built up of field rock, not carved. So interesting thing, it's quite old. And to see that today, you look down into a 50-foot deep hole. So this is really, 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 really old. Okay, marching around the city, march around, okay. Boy, 5 minutes, and then I'll be done. I want you to see this. And so they march around 6 times, the 7th time they march around 7 times. Everybody's getting kind of excited about this, and the people on the wall are wondering what's going on. And they blow a long blast on the shofars, and it goes, and all the people shout. And they're stomping around, they're facing toward the city. All the people shout, and the walls fell down flat. Now, if you know how gravity works, which is really well and pretty consistently, it would try to fall down straight down, but when it started to spread out, it would have to go down the outside. It would rumble down the outer casemate. And if it's an earthquake type of thing, it would shatter and break in some places and come down. There are other places, for reasons nobody seems to understand, that wouldn't be touched. And so you'd have this kind of shape in the resulting rubble. But it would definitely be open. Now, one of the things that we would expect, since the wall was made of mud brick, is that those mud bricks, being brittle, would bump and rumble and shatter and break and turn into a kind of a bricky rubble around the outside. Strangely enough, in the 50s, Kathleen Kenyon dug this trench. And it's a little hard to see today. I've seen photographs of the original section. And it's actually really easy to see. In this part, you see the sloped casemate wall with the French drains every so often. And so this is the glacis. And then over the top of that, you see this light-colored streak. In Kathleen Kenyon's day, that was a kind of a red brick color. And she called it the red bricky streak. That same red bricky streak continues outward from the base of the walls for about 200 yards in every direction all the way around the dell, to various depths. I mean, some places you don't find it at all, but it's out there for about 200 yards. And then over the top of that is just the regular dust and dirt and accumulation that happens when a place has been abandoned for a long, long time. Jericho, we're told in the Bible, was cursed by Joshua at the end of this battle. He said, I'm putting a curse on this place. May the man who raises his walls be cursed, and may he lose his firstborn at the erection of the gates. Okay, so 600 years later, a fella from Bethel named Hiel came and rebuilt the walls and the gates of Jericho. Lost his firstborn as a result. But for 600 years, the rains came down in the winter, and the bugs and the birds and the small animals inhabited this place and carried things away, and people stopped by to steal anything that wasn't tied down. So you have a hiatus of 600 years. We find that in the archaeological record. And then we find the Iron Age settlement that's built on top of it. And so you can see the Iron Age walls. Those are really easy to detect. And those are built on top of the older Middle Bronze Age walls. It's exactly the pattern we'd expect. Well, anyway, so this is that red bricky streak is what's left of the walls of Jericho. They didn't come down everywhere at once in all the same ways, but they did in fact come down. I'm minus 1 minute into my time. I'm running out, but I'll take a quick question. Yeah.
Just thinking about the promise of the Exodus.
Yeah.
God makes his promise to deliver his people, but also to give them the promised land.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen this before, but it seems like that whole consecration with Moses on holy ground, and now this with Joshua on holy ground, that this is actually a hugely monumental point in the history of the nation of Israel and God fulfilling his promises. Maybe you could comment on that just a little bit.
Yeah, well, your comment is exactly right. This is a literally monumental moment. At this point, Israel first takes possession, actual possession as a free people of a chunk of that which God has promised. They receive that chunk of the promised land when they put their feet on it. The infantry had to actually walk up through the rubble and take the city. There's no defense reported. The people of Jericho simply were defeated. There's no report of a battle. There's nothing. God simply gave them into Israel's hands, and it's not a pretty thing. They killed them all, except for a few that were kept, and they shouldn't have been. Next week we'll get there. Okay, thank you for coming. It's always good to have some of the little ones. I know they get fidgety, but that's all right. That's all right. They will have heard some important stuff. Later on, you can say, "You remember that?" No, I don't, but they do.